Every morning, I give myself 30 quiet minutes to ground myself, coffee in my favorite blue mug, Pixel the cat curled in my lap, then 10 slow minutes of yoga to clear my head. Phone on silent so nothing can touch me before the day begins. That morning was no different, until I finally flipped my phone over. 14 missed calls. One text from my boss in all caps, "Need you here. Urgent." I smiled. I knew exactly why. I'm Mia Carter, and I'm a software developer. For the last 2 years, almost all my time has been devoted to one project, Cura. It started as a small scribble in my notebook, just a question I couldn't shake. What if there was a way for doctors to have every important piece of information in front of them the moment they needed it? Not buried in paperwork. Not locked away in some file no one thinks to open. Just there. Ready to use. The idea came from something personal. Someone in my family had gone through a medical emergency where time mattered more than anything. But the right information didn't reach the right doctor fast enough. I had to watch as the chance to fix it slipped away, knowing it could have ended differently if they'd had the full picture sooner. I couldn't change what happened to them, but I could try to stop it from happening to someone else. That's how Cura was born, an assistant for doctors that works alongside them, spotting patterns, flagging urgent issues, and helping them make the best decision as quickly as possible. 2 years of my life went into building it. My days blurred into late-night coding sessions, testing marathons, and bursts of inspiration that had me grabbing my laptop at midnight. It pushed me, challenged me, and reminded me every single day why I love creating things that matter. Pixel stretched against my arm, flicking her tail across my wrist. I set my mug down and scratched her under the chin, my phone still glowing on the counter. The first time I said the name Cura out loud in a meeting room, I thought my voice might crack. My hands were warm and clammy at the same time, the kind of nerves you get when you know something matters more than usual. I'd rehearsed that pitch for weeks, muttering it while brushing my teeth, whispering it in the car on the way to work, even pretending Pixel was my audience when no one was around. The conference room that morning was the kind of space that made you sit up straighter. A long polished table stretched almost the length of the room, sunlight streaming through tall windows and bouncing off clean glass walls. The chairs were plush enough to make you sink in, but not so comfortable that you'd forget you were there to focus. In the center of the table sat a carafe of coffee and a bowl of fruit that looked like it belonged in a magazine photo shoot. It was the biggest audience I'd ever pitched to, a mix of department heads, a few board members, and Greg Martin, the company's head of product development, near the far end of the table. They were all waiting for me to start. I began with the problem. I talked about the delays that happen when doctors don't get the right information in time. I didn't share my family member's name, I wasn't ready to make it personal in that setting, but I made it clear this wasn't just about efficiency. It was about preventing the kind of tragedy that happens when crucial details fall through the cracks. Then I told them what Cura could do. How it could gather and analyze data from different sources in seconds. How it could flag issues before they became emergencies. How it could run quietly in the background, ready to step in the moment something needed attention. When I finished, the room went silent for a beat. My pulse was loud in my ears. Then Greg leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and said with a smile, "This is exactly the kind of project we should be putting our resources into." It was like his words broke a seal, questions started coming from every side. How much time would it take? What size team would I need? What budget would make it possible? I answered as steadily as I could, my confidence growing with each nod I saw around the table. By the end of the meeting, I had their approval. It didn't come with applause, but it felt monumental, a few firm handshakes, a couple of good job comments, and Greg's low, certain, "Let's make this happen." Walking out of that room, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. Cura wasn't just an idea anymore. She was a greenlit project, and I was the one leading her into existence. After the pitch, it felt like my life went from walking speed to a sprint. One week I was an outsider walking into Vitali's Technologies with an idea, and the next, I was showing up every day to a room full of people who were just as excited to build Cura as I was. By mid-morning, the project space always had this hum to it. Whiteboards covered in fresh diagrams, sticky notes scattered in little explosions of color, voices bouncing back and forth across the room. You could hear laughter from one corner and see someone hunched over a sketch in another. It was messy in the best way. Greg would pop in often. He had a way of making it seem casual, like he'd just happened to wander by, but he always left a mark on the conversation. Sometimes it was a suggestion, sometimes a quick drawing to explain an idea. He never lingered too long, but when he was there, the team listened. We found a rhythm without even talking about it. There were bursts of energy in the mornings, slow stretches in the afternoons where someone would break the tension with a bad joke, and nights when we'd stay longer than we planned because we were so close to solving something. When Kura passed her first trial without a single hiccup, we ended up eating pizza on the floor, replaying the moment like we couldn't quite believe it had happened. Even on the frustrating days, and there were plenty, nobody checked out. If something wasn't working, we all leaned in until it did. Looking back, I think that's what made those months so good. Everyone was in it for real. No one was just punching a clock. At the time, I thought that kind of momentum could last forever. Turns out, I was wrong. It didn't happen in a single, obvious moment. That's the tricky thing about changes in a team, they creep in around the edges. You notice something small, tell yourself it's nothing, and then a few weeks later you're realizing it's been building for a while. The first thing I noticed was the meetings. In the beginning, Greg would drop by our workspace, grab a marker, and join the conversation. He'd listen to our debates, toss out a question or two, and then step back so we could run with the ideas. It felt collaborative. But after a while, he started calling his own meetings in the smaller conference room down the hall. They were just for me and maybe one or two others, never the whole team. The tone in those meetings was different. He wasn't asking so much as telling. He'd outline what we were doing next, but the way he phrased things, it was as if some of the decisions had already been made without me. And when those plans were later shared with the rest of the team, he would present them like they were his initiatives from the start. In the early days, he would call Kura our project. Our vision. Our work. Lately, in passing conversations with other department heads, I'd hear him refer to it as the product I'd been developing or my latest build. The first time, I brushed it off. The second time, I noticed it. After that, I couldn't help but hear it every time it happened. One afternoon, I was leaving late after running extra tests, and I passed the glass-walled conference room. Greg was inside with two people I didn't recognize. My pitch slides, the originals I'd made, were up on the big screen, the hand-drawn diagrams replaced with crisp digital versions. I paused in the hall. From where I stood, I could hear just enough to know he was walking them through the concept. He was animated, confident, nodding along as they praised certain features. He never mentioned my name. When he looked up and spotted me, his expression didn't flicker. He just kept talking, almost as if I wasn't there. I waited, thinking maybe he'd wave me in or at least acknowledge me, but he didn't. Eventually, I turned and walked away. The next morning, he didn't bring it up. Neither did I. Still, the work itself went on. The team was hitting milestones, the energy in the room was still there, and Greg remained as friendly as ever in our one-on-ones. If I hadn't been paying attention, I might have convinced myself nothing had changed at all. But now I was listening for it, the way credit was given in meetings, the way my ideas came back to me through Greg's voice as if they'd originated somewhere else. At the time, I told myself it was stress. That maybe I was being oversensitive. But deep down, a part of me already knew the ground was starting to shift beneath my feet. Greg had asked to meet that afternoon. I figured it was to run through the last few details before tomorrow, so I grabbed my notes and headed to the small conference room. In my head, we'd be locking down timing, fine-tuning a couple of talking points, maybe running through the slides one last time. I walked in ready for business. He was already there. The blinds were half closed, letting sunlight stripe across the table in pale bands. A slim folder sat in front of him, lined up so neatly with the table's edge it almost looked staged. His laptop was closed, which was odd for Greg. Normally he'd be mid-click, hopping between tabs, half his focus still on his screen while we talked. I set my notebook down, uncapped my pen. "So," I said, sliding into the chair across from him, "where do you want to start?" Greg didn't answer right away. He opened the folder and pushed a few stapled pages toward me. My eyes fell on the title at the top. Notice of termination. For a moment, the words didn't stick. I blinked, glanced back down, certain I'd read it wrong. "What is this?" "It's what it says," Greg replied, his voice calm, almost casual. "Your contract is being terminated, effective immediately." The room felt suddenly smaller. "I don't understand." This wasn't an easy decision, he cut in, tone smooth, like this was a line he'd practiced. "But moving forward, the project needs one clear lead. The transition will be smoother this way." I stared at him. "Greg, Kura is my project." I pitched it. "You've done great work," he said, like he was ticking off a box on a checklist. "Really? But I'll be taking it from here. You'll get your final pay, and I'll make sure your contributions are noted." Noted. Like a polite afterthought. I could feel the weight of everything we'd built, the months of testing, the breakthroughs, the late nights spent tweaking details until they were just right, and here he was, sweeping me off the board in a few sentences. His expression didn't waver, as though we were discussing a scheduling change, not the project I'd poured 2 years into. Part of me wanted to fight, to lay out every reason this was wrong. But looking at him, I could see it, the firmness in his posture, the finality in his tone. His mind had been made up long before I sat down. So I closed my notebook, slid the termination notice back across the table, and stood. "All right," I said quietly. Greg gave a single nod, already glancing down at the folder again, but I caught it. That faint flicker of relief, like he'd been bracing for a battle and was glad it never came. I walked out without another word. Not because I didn't have plenty to say, but because I knew this wasn't over. Not for me. Not for Kura. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I didn't have to, officially, I wasn't part of Vitali's anymore. But that didn't mean I stopped paying attention. Word travels fast in a place that's buzzing with an upcoming presentation, and I still had friends on the team. From what I heard, Greg wasted no time stepping into the spotlight. The day after our meeting, he was in the project space early, standing in front of the big screen like it was his stage. He walked the team through the slides, tweaking a word here, changing a color there, making sure every graph lined up perfectly. He always had an eye for presentation, and now, without me in the picture, he had full control over the narrative. People said he looked confident. Relaxed, even. Like someone who'd been waiting for this moment and knew exactly how to own it. I could picture it perfectly, Greg with one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing toward Kura's interface, speaking in that measured tone he used when he wanted people to see him as the calm center of the room. He didn't know I still had an inside view. Small updates trickled to me through casual texts, nothing dramatic, just little glimpses. Someone mentioned he'd rehearsed in front of a few executives that afternoon and gotten nods all around. Another said the marketing team had joined in to make sure the visual branding matched his talking points. In all of this, one detail stayed exactly the same, the ethical protocol. It was still baked into Kura, same as it had been since the early builds. I'd pushed for it from the start, and not just as a checkbox feature. It was a safeguard, an AI-driven filter designed to recognize when the system might be used in ways it shouldn't. It could read the context of a request, flag harmful intent, and, if necessary, refuse to cooperate. Greg had agreed to it months ago, mostly to keep me happy, but he'd never cared about it beyond that. In his mind, it was a harmless, buried function that didn't need rehearsal time, didn't need to be mentioned to investors, and certainly didn't need to be part of the big story he wanted to tell. I let him keep thinking that. The less he remembered about why I'd wanted that protocol, the better. From the outside, Greg's confidence only grew. Someone posted a picture from rehearsal on the company's internal feed, him at the front, mid-sentence, sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the visionary leader. It was the kind of image he'd been building toward for months, whether he realized it or not. I didn't step in. I didn't send messages. I just watched from a distance, letting him settle deeper into the idea that he had this under control. That tomorrow evening, all he had to do was walk into that room, hit his marks, and take the applause. The investor demo was set for the evening, one of those carefully orchestrated showcases where nothing is left to chance. The lighting would be just warm enough to make the room feel inviting without dimming the glow of the giant display screens. The catering table would be lined with polished silver trays, ready to roll out at exactly the right moment. The Tullys had always been good at this part, dressing up the tech so it felt like the future was already here. I wasn't there in person. But I didn't need to be. Taylor, one of the developers I'd worked closest with, had promised to keep me updated. "Don't worry," she'd said when I cleaned out my desk, "you'll get the play-by-play." And she meant it. Before the demo even began, a photo landed on my phone, the big glass doors thrown open, guests filtering in, a sleek welcome banner with Kura's name in deep blue letters stretching across the entryway. Another followed quickly, Greg at the front of the room, shaking hands with two men in suits, smiling like he'd just stepped onto the cover of a magazine. "Full performance mode," Taylor texted. "Even has the sleeves rolled." You'd laugh. She described the transformation of our old workspace. Where there had once been whiteboards cluttered with sketches and sticky notes, there was now a spotless presentation floor. Kura's interface glowed on the main display, and smaller stations were set up around the room for later demonstrations. It sounded like something out of a tech conference brochure. Then the presentation began. Taylor's messages came fast, Greg opening with a polished origin story, one that left out how Kura had actually come to be. Investors nodded along as he moved through the features, hitting every point with just the right amount of detail. He was in his element, pacing the room, gesturing toward the screen as though he were revealing something truly groundbreaking for the very first time. When he announced the live demonstration, Taylor said the room leaned forward. Investors always wanted to see a product in action, slides were nice, but proof was better. Greg pulled up a test case and started walking them through Kura's analysis process. Everything was smooth. Predictable. Safe. Until it wasn't. Taylor's next text came in all caps, "Oh my God." I called her immediately. She answered in a whisper, the low hum of the room behind her. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "He's mid-demo, everything's working fine, then suddenly this big red banner flashes across the main display, potential unethical use detected. Request denied." I could hear chairs shifting, someone coughing into the silence. Taylor went on quickly, he tried to clear it, but the system wouldn't let him. It was asking for an override and a justification. Investors started asking what it meant, if the system was broken, if it was filtering something it shouldn't. Greg must have been scrambling, but the thing about the ethical protocol was that it didn't care about saving face. It didn't care about his script, his audience, or the money in the room. It cared about the rules I'd built into it from the very beginning, rules designed to keep Kura from being used in the wrong hands. And now, in front of the people Greg had been trying to impress most, it was making those rules impossible to ignore. So the next morning, when I saw the missed calls, I knew what it was about. 14 of them. All from Greg. And one text in all caps, "Need you here. Urgent." I was still in my grounding routine when I saw it, coffee in my favorite blue mug, Pixel sprawled in my lap like a warm, purring weight, 10 minutes of slow yoga to ease into the day. Normally, I'd let the phone stay face down until I was ready to deal with the world. But that morning, when I finally flipped it over, the numbers glared up at me like a headline. Greg hadn't spoken to me since the meeting where he'd cut me out. He'd looked relieved then, almost smug, like pushing me aside had cleared his path. For him to call now, 14 times, meant something had gone sideways. And not in a small way. Still, I didn't throw on my coat and run. I finished my coffee. Fed Pixel. Took a shower hot enough to steam the mirror. I've learned that walking into someone else's mess on their terms rarely works in your favor. Better to arrive when you're ready, not when they demand it. While I dressed, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Taylor. Just 4 words, it's about the demo. That was enough to confirm my guess. She didn't give details, just hinted that Greg had hit a wall in front of the investors. I didn't need a full report to know what had happened. Even so, there was no guarantee of how this would play out. Greg could be gearing up to throw blame my way, trying to make me the scapegoat for whatever embarrassment he'd just suffered. Or maybe he'd want me to quietly fix the problem and let him walk back into the spotlight as if nothing had happened. Either way, the balance of power had shifted. His calls were proof of that. I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, my breath curling in small clouds as I headed down the familiar route toward the Vitali's building. My mind kept replaying the last time I'd seen Greg, the confident smile, the easy nod when I left his office. I wondered if that expression had survived the night. By the time the glass doors came into view, I'd made a quiet promise to myself, whatever was waiting inside, I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. I pushed the door open and stepped into the lobby. The receptionist didn't even ask me to sign in. She just gave a quick, nervous smile and said, "He's waiting upstairs." Greg's office door was already half open when I got there. He was pacing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped and fast. The moment he saw me, he ended the call mid-sentence and tossed the phone onto the desk with a soft thud. "Finally," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut. "Do you have any idea the mess you dropped me into?" I stepped inside slowly, letting the door ease shut behind me. My bag went onto the chair by the wall. "Mess?" I asked lightly, tilting my head. "You'll have to be more specific." His eyebrows pulled together. "Don't act like you don't know. Your so-called ethical safeguard went off in the middle of the investor demo. Right there on the main screen, in front of everyone." I kept my face neutral, almost curious. "Oh?" Greg gave a humorless laugh. "Everything was going perfectly until that thing decided to pop up and humiliate me. Do you have any idea what it's like to have a room full of people staring at you, wondering if your product even works?" I gave the faintest shrug. "It works. It just works in ways you weren't prepared for." His mouth tightened. "Don't get clever with me. That alert should never have been triggered." "It was triggered because Kura saw something in the case you gave it," I said evenly. "Something it recognized as potentially harmful." "That's not a glitch, Greg. That's exactly what it's designed to do." His voice rose. "It embarrassed me in front of people we need." "You think those investors want a system that says yes to everything?" I asked. "That's not reliability, that's recklessness. The reason Kura is worth anything is because she can tell the difference between a legitimate request and one that could cause harm." He stopped just short of me, close enough for me to see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that come from stress more than age. And for just a flicker of a moment, I saw it, recognition. He knew I was right. But he wasn't the type to admit it out loud, not when pride was at stake. "They're expecting a follow-up this week," he said finally, voice tight. "I can't walk back in there without fixing this." I let that hang in the air for a moment before saying, "No." His brows shot up. "No? I'm not here to quietly patch things up so you can walk back in like nothing happened. If you want me involved again, it's going to be under my terms." His jaw flexed. "What terms?" I took a step closer to his desk, closing the distance he'd tried to claim as his territory. 1. My role in Kura's creation is restored publicly. That means presentations, press releases, interviews, my name is back where it belongs. 2. I get full oversight of the project going forward, including veto power over any changes to the safeguard. And 3. I get a share of the profits that reflects my contribution. Retroactively. Greg's laugh was short and sharp. That's a lot to ask. That's the cost of solving your problem, I said, my voice steady. You can either meet those terms or you can try to find someone else who understands Kura well enough to untangle this without ripping out the very thing that makes it valuable. He stared at me, weighing it. I could almost hear the gears turning, calculating how much he could push back, how much he could risk losing. Finally, he leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms. And if I say no? Then you'll have to explain to the investors why your groundbreaking product refused to cooperate, twice. The silence that followed was long enough to make him shift his stance. Greg didn't answer me right away. He stood there with his arms crossed, studying me like I was a puzzle he didn't quite know how to solve. I could almost see him measuring the costs, calculating the angles. But I didn't move, didn't fill the silence for him. Finally, he exhaled, a sharp sound like air leaving a tire. Fine, he said. You'll get your credit. You'll have oversight. And profit share. Retroactive. Each concession landed like it was being pried out of him, but he said them all. I gave a single nod, as if we'd simply concluded a standard business arrangement instead of undoing months of quiet sabotage. Then we have a deal. We signed everything that afternoon, ironclad terms, written and witnessed, so there'd be no loopholes for him to slip through later. If Greg ever tried to cut me out again, he'd be breaking a legal agreement, not just an unspoken one. The follow-up presentation that week felt entirely different. This time, I was at the front of the room beside Greg, my name right there on the first slide. I walked the investors through Kura's capabilities, taking questions as they came, speaking with the calm certainty of someone who knew every line of thought that had shaped the system. There was no awkward scrambling, no tension hanging over the table, just an even current of interest building as we went along. From there, everything moved at breakneck speed. Contracts were signed within weeks. Funding poured in. Our team grew so fast we had to lease an entire additional floor. Within the year, Kura was active in hospitals across 3 states, assisting doctors in diagnosing and managing patient care faster and more accurately than they'd thought possible. Trust in the system grew quickly, and it became a name people recognized and relied on. Greg still appeared at some events and presentations, but the dynamic had shifted. My voice was part of the conversation again, and decisions about Kura's future went through me. The control I'd fought for wasn't symbolic, it was real, and it shaped every step we took from then on. One evening, months after launch, I stayed late in the office. The building was quiet, the glow of the monitors casting warm pools of light across the workstations. I opened Kura's dashboard and watched live cases stream in, hospitals across the map, each one using the system to help make decisions that mattered. Lines of data became patient charts, recommendations, and in many cases, green checkmarks showing positive outcomes. It struck me how far the idea had come from the moment I'd first sketched it out. Back then, it was just a spark, born from long nights thinking about my aunt's struggle to get a clear diagnosis, the delays, the frustration. I had wanted something that could help doctors move faster without cutting corners. Something that would protect people from mistakes, not just impress them with speed. Now, here it was, alive, running, making a difference. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet hum of the servers fill the room. It wasn't the headlines or the numbers that stayed with me. It was the knowledge that the version of Kura I had fought for, the one that kept its integrity, was the one in use today. Greg had tried to own it. Rewrite it. But in the end, the story had circled back where it belonged. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I'd make the same stand all over again if I had to.